Military sales. A lot of you are near military installations, or you have a recruiter station somewhere close by. You guys need to be aware of how to conduct a military sale. Keep in mind, the individual must be on active duty. No guard, no reserve, must be active duty. Must have a valid military ID. Believe it or not, military IDs expire. And guess what? If you take an expired military ID, it's no different than taking an expired driver's license or an expired CCW. So you want to make sure that military ID is valid. Do not make a copy of the military ID. That is actually a felony. Do not take a copy of your military ID. PCS orders, those are permanent change of station. They must stay permanent. Okay. Can't be temporary, can't be TDY, TDA, or anything like that. Temporary duty. They must be permanent. The PCS orders must be valid. We actually had an individual who actually reported for duty prior to the report to date. His orders were not valid yet. They have to be valid in order for them to establish residency in the state that the base is located. Electronic orders are allowed. You can actually look at them on their phone, or they could email them to you for you to verify and capture the information that's required to be on the 4473. Keep in mind, you are not required to keep a copy. A lot of FFLs, they keep a copy, and that's how I figure out whether or not they did the right thing. It's most certainly the way the IOI is going to figure out whether or not you did the right thing. So you do not need to maintain a copy. You have enough paperwork as is. Just make sure you're filling out that form 4473 correctly when it comes to your responsibilities. Let's talk to the military sales transfer, the actual transfer of the firearm. The ATF form 4473 obviously is required to be completed just like any other transfer. The address, this is key. This is paramount. I think there's a lot of information sitting out there with military members and conducting transfers to military members that's old, very old and outdated. This is what's required per the ATF. If the individual lives on base, they are going to be issued an address. They are to use that address if they live on base. Okay. If the individual lives off base, if they live in an apartment, they own a home, whatever the case may be, in that scenario, they are going to put the off base address that they live at. They no longer need to print their permanent duty station address in addition to their off base residence. They only need to put their off base residence. If they live off base and reside in a different state, perfect example of this is Fort Campbell. Fort Campbell is in Kentucky, but it traverses both Kentucky and Tennessee. And a lot of military members are very smart because Kentucky has state income tax and Tennessee does not. So a lot of military members stationed at Fort Campbell tend to move into Tennessee so they can avoid paying extra taxes. If this is the situation and the individual lives off base but in a different state, this is the one time when they are going to list both their military address. So that's the address of whatever their permanent duty station is, their headquarters, their unit, squadron, whatever the case may be. They're going to list that address as well as their residence address. This is the only time they are going to add both addresses to the form 4473. If you are utilizing PCS orders to create a scenario where the individual resides in that state, so they're establishing residency based on their military orders, you must, again, you must use their military ID for item 26A, the identification. You cannot use the driver's license or state ID. This is a big no-no. You will get revoked. You must use their military ID for identification. Ensure you complete 26C. We've had this a few times on our mock inspections. You must include the city and state along with the PCS base or post or station or whatever the heck it is. All right. So you have to include the city and state. You must include the effective date of the orders, right? This is your cross-reference point to make sure the effective date coincides with the date of the purchase. And then if there are PCS order numbers, they're going to be usually located at the top in the header. Make sure that you're recording what those PCS orders are, okay? This has reared its ugly head a few times. You no longer need to obtain a lease agreement or something similar like that to show proof of residency. You no longer need that. It's come up a few times now. I know that used to be the case years and years ago. You no longer need this information. It no longer needs to be required or requested, and it definitely does not need to be added to the 4473. All right. That's military sales, the transfer. Where are you going to get in trouble with military sales? This is what we are constantly seeing as it relates to citable violations with regard to military sales: accepting invalid or temporary orders, transfer prior to order's effective date. We talked about that earlier. The military member is not on active duty. All right. It's a TDI, temporary duty assignment, or temporary duty period. All right. So make sure they're on active duty. The CAC card ID or military ID is expired. All right. You got to make sure it's valid. The FFL accepted a driver's license or other identification for identification purposes. You have to use that military ID if you're utilizing it with the PCS orders. Military member didn't list both addresses when required. We've seen this a number of times. If they're living on off base, but in a different state, they must put both addresses. Accepting orders for PCS to a duty station in another state. We've seen this a few times where the individual is moving out of state and has orders, and the FFL has accepted those orders, even though they are not orders in the state the FFL is located in. Got to be careful. You got to be watching for that. Accepting military orders for dependents. That's the spouse or child of the military member. Dependents must establish residency. They cannot use the military member's orders to establish residency. They must establish residency themselves. Okay, so you cannot accept military orders for somebody, a spouse or a child. PCS orders, again, I have to keep repeating this, are only valid when accompanied by a military ID. All right. Don't use that driver's license or state issued identification. You have to use their military ID.